is the financial support to do it and to keep pushing it out for free. Will you go right now, please? worldviewfoundation.com and make a contribution. You're not going to see Fox News, Newsmax. None of them are going to do a program like you just heard with those three gentlemen, bringing the Christian worldview and Bible prophecy analysis on the Middle East and Trump's Gulf tour. You're not going to get that just about anywhere. Certainly not live like we do, day in and day out. We need your support now, please. worldviewfoundation.com. You'll also find our mailing address there if you prefer to support us through the mail. Talk to you tonight on Brandon House Live and the Worldview Report. Take care.
You're watching Worldview 2, built on the 35 years of Worldview books, documentaries, research, high-profile interviews, and the radio and television broadcasts of Brandon House.
Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
I would say this to the Chief Justice. You have let these Democrat activist judges sabotage American voters. They are election deniers by sabotaging the President of the United States exercising his core Article 2 powers. And if you refuse to get your judicial house in order because you're scared of bad press in the Washington Post and the New York Times, Congress is going to get your judicial house in order for you. And it's going to be through oversight. It's going to be through funding cuts. It's going to be through jurisdiction stripping. It could be through impeachment. But frankly, the simpler approach, as Speaker Newt Gingrich has been talking about, is just eliminating a judge's seat. So if the Chief Justice is not going to step up and get his judicial house in order, we're not going to let, as American voters, we're not going to let these activist judges sabotage our will and sabotage the President of the United States.
And you still see your date is still before they leave on the last day of June to go for their 3-month summer break. They don't come back, I think, to the first Monday in August. Your belief is it will somehow will have some sort of at least attempt at a rectification of this, sir?
Look, illegal aliens do not have constitutional due process rights related to remaining in this country. And the only time they get due process rights is when Congress provides those due process rights as it relates to remaining in this country. If these if these 7 generals on the Supreme Court, Commanding General John Roberts and his 6 lieutenant generals, think that they're just going to create constitutional due process rights for these illegal aliens, including Tren de Aragua terrorists, where the president can't get these people the hell out of our country, the Supreme Court is going to lose its legitimacy with the American people, and when that happens, it loses everything. So this is a dire warning to the Chief Justice. Proceed with caution.
Lessons from Rome's late-stage republic. Welcome back to Training Tuesday. The Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube, our X-Spaces simulcast, amongst other things, and YouTube and Rumble and Truth Social Plus, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and Roku. Well, prosecuting your political opponents, accusing them of collaborating with foreign enemies, judicial obstruction of the executive, destroying the court system's credibility, importing illegal aliens to increase your voter base. All of these that you just heard in that clip have been tried before, and much more, by the way. We can and should analyze the classics and history and teach our children, especially the Roman Empire's long demise, to gain an understanding of what's happening to the United States Republic today. And we've got to find ways to prevent our own demise by confronting and finding solutions for this type of activity. Well, my guest today to talk to us about these issues and how to view them through the lenses of history and the actions of honorable and nefarious leaders and politicians is Alex Pectus, whose stated mission is to bring the wisdom of Plutarch, historian, philosopher, literary artist, to modern audiences. He's a Princeton PhD, a former university professor, and host of the Cost of Glory podcast. You can follow him on X at Cost of Glory. Alex, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Colonel Maness, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm excited for this show, sir, and I appreciate you being flexible on the schedule, man. Hey, the first question I have is, you've studied Rome's decline, you've studied the history, you've studied folks like Plutarch, things they've written, the politicians of the day, and those kind of things. So let's just get right into it. What are the key indicators that a republic is entering that final decline? And do you see those signs in America today?
Well, I sure hope that we can learn some lessons from Rome, because I think we've got a shot to turn the ship around. But, you know, if you feel like you're living in a country where the elites are, more interested in preserving their own privileges and than they are in good government, if you feel like you're seeing the court system being used in a certain way, or certain branches of government used in a certain way, and you're wondering, wait a second, is this actually constitutional? Can they do that? You know something of what it was like to live in late Republican Rome, actually, in the first century BC, in the days of Julius Caesar. And it's been a time period that a lot of people today are looking back to, and certainly it's a period that our founders of this country looked back to try to learn lessons of how they could prevent what's going on. But, you know, one of the things that you see in the late Roman Republic is people start to trust less and less in the instruments of government, because they become more and more tools in the hands of partisan politics, you know, enemies trying to get one up on each other. And so this is the context I think we need to really keep in mind going forward for our country.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you mentioned Julius Caesar, and one of the things that got my attention when I saw your work and looked at your work is that you've taken a close look at his activities and his career, and the careers and activities of his political rivals, his sometimes allies, and those kind of things. There was some factionalism going on during this period of time in Rome. What kind of factions did they have? Were there populists, kind of like what Donald Trump is, or Andrew Jackson was, and what we're seeing today, and some establishment politicians organized in their groups? I think you're muted.
There we are. Sorry about that. So yeah, when Caesar was a boy, I think that it is very comparable. When Caesar is young, there's the first great Roman Civil War, which is a clash between the Optimate faction of Rome, which is kind of the aristocrats, and the populist faction of Rome, which are also kind of, you know, leading politicians who make a career off of speaking to the people and their concerns. And the Optimates, basically the establishment, won. The conservative, you might call them the conservatives, though that's kind of a confusing term for looking at Rome. They win, and Caesar is from a very noble family, but his family is aligned with the populist side. And so he rises through the ranks in Roman politics, kind of with this chip on his shoulder. Like, he's on the one hand a part of the establishment, genetically, if you will, by family background, you know, kind of in a way that Donald Trump was, very well accepted in, New York society for a long time. Yeah. but he made his career on championing the interests of the people and made it his mission to kind of break up the power of the establishment. And this is a long tradition of populism in Rome that goes back to figures like Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, who lived 80 years or so before Caesar's, flourishing rise to power. And some of the issues that divided them were, things like fair distribution of land. The state owns a lot of land and rents it out to tenants, and a lot of the rich have kind of gobbled up these contracts, and they're cash crop farming with massive slave operations, and the little guy can't get a break. And the Roman dream is not that different from the American dream. It's to own your own plot of land, which is kind of like a business, and and to be self-sustaining and to be a kind of citizen soldier. But that's gotten a lot harder. You can kind of compare the way that private equity today is accused of buying up a lot of single-family homes. And so Caesar is kind of championing those people, and he makes, for example, agrarian laws that aim at redistributing some of this land. And there are many other issues, but one of the things that you have that is really comparable, I think, to today is you have these great political legacies of great Roman aristocratic households whose ancient ancestors won wars and did great things for the Republic. And now it's like several generations on, and they have so much wealth and so much, name brand recognition that they don't have to work that hard to get themselves into politics. And they've kind of like lost their edge, and they're more interested in sort of preserving the oligarchy than they are in running the empire. Rome at this point has this huge overseas empire: Spain, Northern Africa, Asia Minor, Greece, all over the Mediterranean. And there's all kinds of corruption in the provinces that is not getting addressed very effectively. So there's this real fascinating aspect of populism that I think is comparable today. And Caesar was a guy who wanted to do something about it. And there's also his famous opponent that was also inspiring to the U.S. founders, Cato the Younger. We have letters of Cato, anonymous letters that were penned earlier in the 18th century. And Cato the Younger was probably Washington's favorite Roman. He was a standout from the aristocracy. He was an optimist from the non-populist side, Caesar's greatest nemesis. But he was a kind of a true Roman of the kind that they don't make anymore, and championed, like, let's hold the Republic together. Let's keep the Constitution functioning the way it has, incremental reforms, and this digging his heels in about keeping the Republic in place essentially as our grandfathers inherited it, over Caesar's revolutionary reforms to solve problems that the Republic had never faced. This was the clash that really led to the breakup of the Roman Republic, not the empire, because the empire, under a monarchy, lasts for many more centuries until at least the 5th century.
Yeah, and I think what we want to do, I think we're at that cusp that you just talked about there, where you have people like me who want to keep the Constitution, but we've got to reinvigorate it to where it's followed. But there's a side piece to the faction on that, and that's those that use that Constitution to try to maintain their power, like the Mitch McConnells of the world. That's who stands out the most to me when I hear about the powerful elite wanting to maintain their power. That, or the Chuck Schumers of the world, the political party hacks that have been in office for 30 years, maintaining that power. They don't really care about the Constitution either. And then you have the folks that would just tear it all down, mostly on the left in the Democrat Party, but there's some on the right too, some anarchist, fascist kind of elements in this country. And then I consider the group I'm in the middle, in the center still. And we want to preserve that, but we don't want to go down the path of making Donald Trump Caesar. And that appears to be, based on what I've read and what you talk about on your podcast, The Cost of Glory, when you're discussing these issues, that appears to be where we may in fact be. We got about a minute to go to our first break. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's important to emphasize that Caesar really didn't want to become a monarch. He was constantly accused of that by his opponents, and he really tried to keep the Constitution together and to play by the rules. And it wasn't until his enemies sort of forced his hand. They said, either you're going to face prosecution for your, what they called illegal, unconstitutional laws that he passed as consul, or you're going to have to march on Rome. And he said, well, I tried everything else. And it's basically, you're saying, I'll either be destroyed or fight it out with you. And so he marches on Rome to show them that he means business, perhaps not really intending that it kind of escalate into a 4-year-long conflict that ended up undoing the Republic. I don't think that was his intention at the beginning of it, but things tend to escalate when they escalate.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. When we come back, we'll see a little clip from the press secretary that kind of highlights where the paths have diverged with the history of Julius Caesar and the elites from Rome, which gives me a positive view as to where we can go next. We're talking with Alex Peckus of the Cost of Glory podcast, a Princeton PhD, has studied Rome and the decline of Rome very much, and it's Training Tuesday. How can we identify the lessons from that and make corrections in this country to preserve the republic that's the United States? That's the big question. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now. And we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
District court rulings about all the fired probationary workers use the same language here just now that was in the statement about fighting back against that ruling. Do you mean appealing or something else? And does the administration plan to comply with those orders in the meantime?
Fighting back by appealing, fighting back by using the full weight of the White House counsel's office and our lawyers at the federal government who believe that this injunction is entirely unconstitutional. And it is, for anybody who has a basic understanding of the law. You cannot have a low-level district court judge filing an injunction to usurp the executive authority of the President of the United States. That is completely absurd. And as the executive of the executive branch, the President has the ability to fire or hire. And you have these lower level judges who are trying to block this president's agenda. It's very clear. And as I just cited, I was appalled by the statistic when I saw it this morning. In 1 month, in February, there have been 15 injunctions of this administration in our agenda. In 3 years under the Biden administration, there were 14 injunctions. So it's very clear that there are judicial activists throughout our judicial branch who are trying to block this president's executive authority. We are going to fight back. And as anyone who saw President Trump and his legal team fighting back, they know how to do it. He was indicted nearly 200 times, and he's in the Oval Office now because all of the indictments, all of these injunctions have always been unconstitutional and unfair. They are led by partisan activists who are trying to usurp the will of this president, and we're not going to stand for it. Thanks, guys.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday, and the title of this show is very appropriate for today. You know, lessons learned from Rome's late stage republic. And my guest today is Alex Peckus, host of the Cost of Glory podcast, who studied this history and studied the individuals and talks about this on his podcast. I recommend you go follow him at Cost of Glory on X. It's a great podcast, the bits that I've seen and the titles that I've seen, and he tweets some great things. I still say tweet, Alex. Well, welcome back. So to start this segment, it's really about, I hate to use the term lawfare because it's bigger than that. This, if you listen to what the press secretary was talking about there, she mentioned a couple of different things. One, the credibility of the judiciary. Two, that Donald Trump's trying to follow the law. That Donald Trump is fighting back, following the law, and following what the courts are trying to say. And then the final bit is that he doesn't want. He's just trying to do his job. That the Constitution gives him this explicit powers to do. One of the questions that pops into my mind over that is, did Rome's elites and the power brokers use this type of legal maneuvering that we're seeing on their leaders? I mean, I know Caesar eventually crossed the Rubicon and became a monarch, but before that, were they using these types of things on the primary leaders of the Republic?
Absolutely. And I think that when the framers of the Constitution were looking at Rome, as they did very intently, Madison and Hamilton were great students of history. One of the things that they learned from the example of the fall of the Republic is you have to have an independent judiciary, which is to say you have to have an executive that is independent and a judiciary that is independent. It goes both ways. And the Romans didn't have a lot of those checks and balances in place. So, the people who run the political courts in Rome are praetors, the second rank executives. They hold 1-year terms. And all of these guys are members of the Senate, and they are thinking of their political careers and their run for the consulship in a year or two. So you don't have lifetime judges, which is something that we do have. And it was very easy to their judges and Romans have jurors too. So the prosecutor and the defendant get to pick some of their jurors. The jurors tend to come from the upper classes of society, but it's very easy to kind of prejudice the outcome of a case by picking jurors in a certain way. And maybe you pick jurors that are going to be open to bribes because they're disreputable, and that happened a lot. And there's many funny instances of this. But what you see, where you see it really breaking down and threatening the state, not just with kind of everyday run-of-the-mill corruption, but a total kind of catastrophic collapse, is really in the career of Julius Caesar himself. So he, when he's the consul in 59 BC, he passes all these laws notably through kind of finding ways around legal obstructionism that are put up against him by his opponents. For example, to pass a law in Rome, you need to have a citizen assembly ratify it, and they have to pick a day to have that vote. And what his opponent did was declare all of the possible days that you could have a citizen assembly vote as national holidays. So basically, he made passing laws illegal in Caesar's term as consul, which was ridiculous and out of line and unreasonable, but legal. And so Caesar just basically ignored this, and he passed his laws anyway, and he held citizen assemblies, and he said, well, what are you going to do about it? And what they said, here's what we'll do about it. We're going to prosecute your ass as soon as excuse my French, as soon as you're out of office.
Yeah.
We're going to bring you down. But so he went off, he manages to go off for a military command right after his consulship to his famous conquest of Gaul, which took 8 years. And all that time he's immune from prosecution. But all of that time also his enemies are like, as soon as you get back here, you're dead meat, man. We've got a long laundry list, and and they would couch it in kind of these nicer terms like, oh, you need to face accountability, and the Republic has to have accountability for its leaders. But of course, everybody knew that they wanted to bring him down, and because they know that they can do that. They can pick the jurors, they can pick the judge. they have a strong mandate because they can his opponents in the establishment can kind of control the courts. And this is actually the issue that brought about the Great Civil War that made him, de facto monarch of Rome, because he said, I just want to be reinstated as one of Rome's greatest citizens that I deserve now. Obviously, I'm its greatest conqueror. I'm from one perspective, I'm pretty irreproachable legally. I've always championed the cause of the Republic. I've brought money into the treasury, and now you're trying to treat me like I'm public enemy number one. This isn't fair. And he didn't want to fight that war, but his opponents were just adamant. You will not return to Rome without having essentially a period in which we can prosecute you. And he wanted to run for consul so that he would have immunity when he returned home. And he tried everything, and it broke down. But this is what happens when you can't trust the judiciary to be a fair arbiter. Right. This is the great threat of lawfare that, I think we saw in 2024 when they were prosecuting Trump for all these crazy things, that it really undermines the authority of the court. And when you don't have a court system that is a kind of impartial arbiter of conflicts, that's exactly when things spin out of hand. So I think we have to do everything we can to restore the credibility of the courts by kind of slapping their hands when they overreach, for example. I mean, this is a really important thing that I think the Constitution framers empowered us to do for this very reason, right? So that things wouldn't spin out of control.
Yeah, all the federal courts except for the Supreme Court are all established by the Congress, according to the Constitution. So they have absolute right of control, not just oversight, but of control over the existence of those courts, the districts they're in, the judges that are in them. I think that's one of the places that the founders went right, correct. I'm not sure that lifetime appointments, politically appointed by presidents who are partisan today, is serving us well, though. What are your thoughts on that as far as are there changes we could make to make this system better? I mean, right now, as we heard from Mike Davis, and we'll hear it again in the next segment when we're talking about political prosecutions, we're kind of hanging by a thread because SCOTUS is so far mostly doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think, I'm not a constitutional expert on how this would go out in America, but from the perspective of a Roman, a life appointee in anything, except if it were like a priesthood. They did this with priests, with like, state religion officials. But, for something like a judge, that's a power base that is very disturbing to a kind of free citizen Republican mentality. So maybe that should be questioned. And they were concerned with the power of people who sat in place for a long time in any occupation. So, for example, they don't have kind of very developed tax bureaucracy. They outsource that to contractors. These are the famous publicans, like in the parable of the publican and the Pharisee in the Bible. They felt that it was better to be able to kind of have private contractors that have to compete amongst themselves, and if they screw up or if they try to overreach, then you can just pick another contractor to fulfill that contract. I mean, they do this with collection of taxes, with military supply. They don't have these corporations, this oligarchy of corporations that's kind of captured military policy. They're aware of these problems, and from the Roman perspective, having unelected people in long-term positions of authority is very disturbing, to say the least.
Yeah, one of the other things that has come to my mind as you were talking throughout the show is that Caesar was a military guy. Was his family? Was he from a military generational service family? Because the military services, as you mentioned, is one of the ways that citizens built up their institutional wealth, so to speak, or generational wealth.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So in the Roman mindset, the only way to become the greatest man in Rome is through military achievements, defending the Republic or conquest. And they have this, and the consul is primarily, originally he was a military authority, and the praetors are military generals out in the field, and that's inseparable from their political credibility and clout. And Caesar's Gallic Wars. His father probably fought some military campaigns. We don't know that much, but it's clearly something that interested him from a youth. And another thing that you start to see with a lot of these senators and the kind of lazy, crusty, entitled aristocracy in the late Republic is they're not really getting out in the field and that involved in Rome's wars.
Right.
You start to have a few engagements in a little earlier than Caesar that start to look like forever wars, where people are profiting off of bribes from foreign enemies, or maybe they're invested in some kind of supply contract corporation where the war going on benefits them personally, even though Roman citizen soldiers are getting killed. In the late Roman Empire, this actually is one of the things that brings it down, that you start to get this increasing separation of military and civil authority in terms of like career tracks. So the kind of peaceful, more civilized leaders of local cities and towns, they want their sons to go get educated in law, get a job with the imperial bureaucracy. There's all kinds of great lucrative opportunities there. And then Rome has trouble staffing its armies with like real Roman citizens, and they start to look for the kind of talent from the wilder parts of, along the borders, the Danube, the Rhine, and the East, and these kind of more warlike peoples that are a lot less Roman in their outlook. And eventually they start to bring in barbarian chieftains. Some of them they give citizenship to, who as allied forces to fight off other barbarians that are even less civilized. And this is exactly the case with Alaric, the guy who sacks Rome in 410. He's basically a Roman general that goes rogue. He fought under Theodosius, and the Goths were like great Roman soldiers until suddenly they were like, hey, we want citizenship and we'd like to be able to run for office. And then Alaric's enemies were like, I don't think that's going to work out. And he said, fine, have it your way, and sacked Rome.
That's very interesting, because we face a similar crisis in this country. We'll talk about it more in the next segment. We'll also talk about the prosecution side of this and the differences in where Julius Caesar was at and where Donald Trump is at in current time, but also the similarities and what we need to do to make course corrections. With Alex Peckus of the Cost of Glory podcast. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show.
All right, everybody, that wraps.
And we've ended weaponized government where, as an example, a sitting president is allowed to viciously prosecute his political opponent, like me. How did that work out? Not too good. Not too good.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, and it's Training Tuesday, and my guest today is Alex Petkus of the Cost of Glory podcast, and he studied the late stage Republic of Rome, and we're talking about lessons that can be learned from that time. And as I've said before, there's nothing new under the sun, Alex. I mean, I had to show that clip when when I want to talk about prosecuting your political opponents, because you mentioned that Caesar eventually crossed the Rubicon because of the attempts to prosecute him, even though he tried within the law to work with folks multiple times at different points. But the tipping point was when they finally said, "No, we're coming after you," and he took that step. In this case, fortunately, Donald Trump has not only beaten them politically. All of a sudden, all the charges were dropped, except for that one up in New York, which was a fake charge made into felonies that weren't supposed to, pass the statute of limitations, and all kinds of craziness that happened there. And eventually that evaporated too. And then Donald Trump is reelected, and he gets to make that statement there. So that gives me a clear line and clear vision of hope. That there is some hope in this republic that he was able to defeat that. But the really discouraging thing is that we ever went there in the first place. I didn't think the United States Republic was one of those places that would do that. How did the Romans, did they try to stop it? I know Caesar did, but were there other leaders trying to help him in that process?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, the idea of political accountability is really central in a free republic, rightly so, certainly at Rome. And one of the ways that this manifests at Rome is, when you are an executive, say you become the president, and at the end of your term, you're sent off to, let's say, America owns Greenland. And you're sent off to go govern Greenland, and maybe the native tribes rebel every now and then, and you gotta exert some force. There's court cases to hear. There's tax to collect, and all of this. And what this opened up for a lot of unscrupulous Romans is an opportunity for profiteering and abuse. And a lot of times they're incentivized to do that because they have essentially the Republican system of voting started to be more and more bribery prone as the years went on and the stakes got higher. And so you go into massive debt to finance your campaign. And then, our equivalent would probably be something like insider trading or, stock options and military industrial complex, whatever the case may be, consulting, right? You try to recoup your costs in your post office tour of duty. And this was something that that brought down a lot of guiltless politicians. Like Rutilius Rufus, this famous Stoic, was hated by his enemies, and so they prosecuted him when he came back from his provincial governorship. They said he was extorting the provincials, and they produced some kind of fake witnesses, and bada bang, he's exiled. It's a sad story. In Caesar's case, they were trying to do that because Cato, his nemesis at Rome, Caesar makes some decision in the prosecution of the war, and that arguably he broke a treaty. He said that they broke it first. Cato said, "Well, here's what we need to do. We need to hand Caesar over to his enemies and let them do what they will with him." So there were those kind of abuses or alleged abuses that they were trying to prosecute him for. But the other ones were, and they don't have a really great statute of limitations at Rome. So they're trying to prosecute, and I'm not sure that this would even apply in politics, but they're basically trying to prosecute him in 49 BC for what they said he did wrong in 59 BC. And he's got a lot of allies at Rome. He's got a lot of friends that he's done a lot of favors for that are really trying to advocate for his interests. They're trying to veto various motions of the Senate. but there's only so much you can do. At least at Rome, they didn't have a kind of higher authority that you could appeal to besides the People's Assembly to kind of change the rules and make lawfare more difficult, make the legal system more equitable. It would have taken an outside the box political reformer like Caesar to actually have authority to do something about this, but that was precisely what was impossible for him when he was returning from his tour of duty. So I think that we have a lot better of a shot of controlling political prosecutions. But the thing about a late republic, at least at Rome, is you're not really sure what the rules are until you try to bend them. See how far you can bend them until they snap. So those borders between what is allowable and what is not, that people thought surely they're not going to launch 200 some prosecutions on a former president of the United States. Well, and then they do. What are you going to do about that? Is that going to be the cost of anybody running for office? I think Donald Trump is, well, I was going to say he seems to have been to not think that it's worth it to try to attack Joe Biden. Of course, Biden didn't he issue himself a pardon as he was leaving office? So
I don't remember if he did himself, but he did just about everybody.
Everybody else who they could get him through, and that's another classic tactic is don't attack the guy himself. You attack all of his patronage network, and they were certainly doing that to Caesar, and they were doing that to his friend Pompey before the two men fell out. So I think really standards have to be upheld by pushing back when people try to cross them, and I think it also requires a lot of trust and kind of better political behavior. And that's one of the big problems that we're seeing today is people seem willing to do anything for the sake of their own party's interests. I mean, to me, you see this a lot more on the left. They're a lot less reticent about just raising the specter of tyrants rising and you have to do everything we can to stop them. It starts to sound like Caesar's opponents in the late Republic. Anything is worth stopping this tyrannical man. And I think Donald Trump is much less of a Caesar figure than Caesar was himself, for what it's worth.
I think so. I think it's partly because of the mechanism that the founders built around the Constitution. Quite frankly, in the enumerated powers, got what entity got what. Civilian control of the military is a concept that really I don't think the Romans did implement. That really was the military control of most of it, as you said earlier. Most of them were generals initially, anyway, in the Senate and those kind of things. But we have some fissures, and you mentioned corruption and the cost of a vote. And when you said that, I don't know if you were thinking about the cost of a vote of a citizen for a candidate. I was thinking about a cost of a vote of a senator or a House of Representatives in Congress, because, like the president just signed this big executive order about pharmaceutical drugs cost to try to level that playing field and reset the market, so to speak, which I think is an admirable thing to try to do. He's not trying to do price controls. He's trying to use the market mechanisms to balance it so that we Americans aren't paying for all the cost of research and development on these new drugs and everything. And you got Senator Tom Tillis just before we came on the show announcing he's not going to do that. I mean, when you go, he's not going to support a law to put that, to make that permanent, because look at his donations and his publicly required donations, and where does a lot of them come from? The pharmaceutical industry. And I think that's a challenge that we really have to face down, because the Romans Senate was having that problem too, just in different ways from what you just said.
Absolutely. And they have this idea that politicians should be wealthy, and if they're wealthy enough to mount a political campaign, even if it's completely above ground, above the table, it's still expensive, right? You got to get the word out. but and now we have, and I think that's one of the things that was a debating point about Donald Trump is, he's very rich, and to certain people among the left, that's signs of his necessary corruption. The only way to build a $1 billion fortune is through cheating people and being a scammer. Right. But it gives him this kind of independence, actually, of special interest groups that just really have tied down so many of our congressmen. And it might be worth considering people are talking about term limits on senators, because once you get on the gravy train as a senator, you can kind of multiply, especially if you're in a state like Kentucky, where
exactly
the Democrats don't really have a chance of unseating you. So they thought a lot about these special interests, and there were certain politicians that were kind of in the pocket of equestrian businessmen, these guys farming taxes out in the provinces, these guys running massive mining operations in Spain. And there's all kinds of opportunities for corruption, especially the further away you get from oversight. And in the ancient world, physical distance is really important in that. But when you get into the modern world, just the minutia of pharmaceutical policy, it's not a thing that a lot of Americans really understand, probably.
Right.
When you get into the politics of AI companies, for example, it's really kind of hard to see whose special interests are kind of operating this or that agenda in politics. And so that's what just underlines the importance of independent media, independent journalism these days. I'm thrilled that we've seen a real rise in this since, at least since Trump won. This is a real ray of light, I think, for American politics. Even though it's chaotic and it's ugly often, it's like basically a good thing.
Yeah, and you have people like me that are not professional media types, but are now in the profession, because I think the truth's got to get out. And likewise for you, Alex. We got to take our last break. When we come back, though, I want to talk about one of the biggest factors in the fall, and that is immigration. In our case, it's millions of illegal immigration. I want to talk about how Rome handled that and what they did that caused their problems, and what we're seeing here. Because this clip, it's a long one coming back in, but I'm going to show the whole thing because it's important everybody understand the topic. We'll be right back with Alex Petkus. Lessons from Rome, the last stage empire.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
We know that the Democrats are losing ground, that Donald Trump had great numbers. The last time the governor race was on, a Republican almost won. I don't understand. Who are they representing? Who is their constituency for MS-13?
Yeah, Rachel, I have no idea. I don't know where this narrative came from. I don't know why you would want to run on this platform. I'm a career law enforcement officer, and I don't want to go out and support MS-13 terrorists. I don't want to go out there and support child rapists. And those are the people behind those fences. The people that are in Delaney Hall are criminal aliens that have broken not only immigration law, that another law enforcement agency has found them as a public safety threat and locked them up. So due to sanctuary states like New Jersey, ICE went and arrested those individuals, and we have taken those public safety threats off the street. So instead of protesting my officers and trying to shut down our operation, I would like very much someone to say thank you for us being out there every day and those men and women putting their lives on the line.
Amen to that. Well, this is Ras Baraka. He's a New York mayor. He addresses the crowd. By the way, this is a guy who's running for governor. Watch.
We're not asking for anything that's incorrect. We ask them to obey our laws, to obey the policies and rules here in the city and the state of New Jersey, not to run roughshod over the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, the 4th, the 5th, the 14th Amendment, and everybody on this soil deserves due process. That's the only thing that we're asking for. We're not asking for anything that's incorrect. I actually didn't come down there to protest. I came down there to support my Congress people.
What's your message to the mayor?
My message to the mayor is he said he didn't want to protest yesterday. Then what about the several times during the week he showed up? So that's what people don't know. He and his staff were out there this week. We've had to send people out there to break up protesters there. The mayor and those protesters brought a bulldozer last week. Not only this time, but other times protesting. We've heard intelligence that they're going to continue to protest. So he's trying not to make a statement. It's turned out to be a campaign ad, and he's putting folks at risk. It is wrong. And, you know, with the great support of Secretary Noem, with the great support of the U.S. Attorney's Office, you know, the mayor was charged on the 8 U.S.C. 13. You know, that was trespassing. We now have the support to go ahead, and people that impede our mission, we're going to take action against them. And it's really frustrating, the fact for him to say that he's out there protesting when in fact he wasn't, right? You know, officials had been in that jail last week. They found no issue with it. You know, the congresswoman yesterday said they visited inside and that people were being treated fairly and humane. So I just don't understand why you would do this.
And we're talking lessons from Rome's late stage republic. I used the term empire on the outgoing break, and that's incorrect. The empire went on for several hundred years after the republic died. And the late stage republic lessons is what's important here. And my guest today is Alex Petkus of the Cost of Glory podcast and a Princeton PhD. And Alex, you know, I wanted to show that whole clip there because there's a couple of different issues that I wanted to talk about with you in the context of Rome's late stage republic. And one is citizenship being given to those outsiders. You mentioned it from a military perspective when the fall happened and they were eventually defeated. But that was pretty contentious back then, just like it's very contentious here in the United States today. But there seems to be on one side of the aisle in this country a concerted strategy, a specific intended strategy to remake their voter base. And that those protests are those partisan politicians trying to preserve that strategy, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, this was just so obvious to Roman politicians that so in the generation before Julius Caesar, you have this great horrific conflict called the Social War. Mm-hmm. And it's essentially a war. Rome they control all of Italy informally in the sense that they have a lot of independent tribes and city-states all over Italy that are allied to them. And basically, you know, they're part of Rome's empire with a small e. And I think it's fair to speak of Rome, and people do, having an empire before they were a capital E empire with an emperor. Right. And these Italian communities throughout Italy were important in serving in Rome's armies. They supplied men and talent, and you know they're very like-minded with the Romans. But most of them are not citizens, and I think those people probably had a lot better of a claim to Roman citizenship than a lot of the people that were kind of let in the floodgate in this country in the past 4 years. Mm-hmm. But all the same, one of the issues was for Roman politicians was not so much whether they deserve citizenship or not, which is where often the conversation for us today just stops. Yeah. You know, should America accept these people? It was whoever enfranchises these citizens gets a permanent, loyal voting bloc, loyal to them. You know, it's an incredibly powerful lever in a political system that has, electoral politics. These people are going to vote for you. They're going to owe you a favor for the rest of their life. You're never going to let them forget it. And it's just so obvious to the Romans that this is what's going on. And I think that people are finally starting to wake up today to the fact that illegal immigration is about not just about being a nice, good Samaritan. It's about like building alternative political constituencies. There's all kinds of ways, even if these people don't vote for you, which often they do, even though they're not legal, right? The reports have come out. There's ways that you can have your charity take care of them and you get a consulting fee. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that politicians kind of benefit from having this patronage network that illegal immigrants, who are kind of like a permanent needy class en masse for a lot of these people, it's just kind of Machiavellian and not that well concealed, honestly. So I think that this is something that the Romans probably finessed a little better than we did, but they did eventually open up citizenship to the Italians after a bloody civil war, and it ended up being very messy. But it kind of made sense. But as the empire went on, after the emperors took over in the first century BC, Augustus, eventually citizenship became so diluted, they kept extending the franchise to more and more people, and these people have no chance of voting in an election or for a law at Rome, but citizens have certain rights and privileges, and which is precisely why it was so jealously guarded, because it meant a whole lot to be a Roman citizen. It used to mean a lot, right? And now, what does it mean? And so you go on to the 3rd century AD. The Edict of Caracalla is 212, which grants citizenship to all free people living in the entire Roman Empire.
Wow.
And what does that mean? I mean, maybe that's often seen as a kind of open-minded good thing. And, to their credit, the Romans did have a sense of citizenship that wasn't based on race or even class. They had this sense of like citizenship is about being a contributor, maybe fighting in the army. But when you get to that point where it's so broad that that everybody's got it, then in come these other distinctions. Like they have this legal distinction actually between the nobler people and the humbler people, the honestiores and the humiliores. And it used to be that citizens couldn't be, for example, whipped at the stake or tortured, or they had to have popular appeal to an entire citizen assembly before they could face execution. But those benefits go away when citizenship is so broadened, and they start to accrue to the first class citizens and not the second class citizens. So in come other alternatives to make these distinctions that are still important for people, who contribute more or who have more of a kind of ancestral claim to being the original Romans. Something has to come in, and of course we also talked about this problem of bringing in barbarians later in the Roman Empire, which becomes a whole other issue.
Yeah. The interesting thing about and what gets me going about what's happening in America with the Democrat Party opening the floodgates isn't necessarily that we're letting people in. It's that those people aren't required to show and study America and the Republic for what it's supposed to be, and swear an oath to be allegiant to that Republic, which is not a race thing or a class thing. It's all about following the framework, the Constitution in this case now, and being allegiant to that. But we don't do it. We don't require them to do that. Well, we're down to about a minute and a half here, and I wanted to ask you, on the way out here, what is the single most important lesson the United States can learn from Rome's demographic and political challenges in the late stage of their republic that we could address? What's the one thing you would tell us?
Well, it's a little circular, but I really believe it. The Romans studied their own history very carefully, and any politician who was active knew the history of the Republic. They knew their own traditions. They studied the Greeks very carefully too, and learned as many lessons as they could from them. And the Romans had a very strong culture, just like the Greeks, of heroes and honoring heroes. And so much of knowing your own history is knowing who you're trying to be like and what the standard is for a great statesman, what kind of personal qualities they should have and what they should aspire to be. And that's something that we learn by looking at examples most of all. And so we can emulate the Romans by studying our own history, which includes a look to antiquity. It's just programmed into the DNA of this country that, we were obsessed with Rome and outdoing the Romans, right? Like this is part of our admiration for Rome. We want to honor them by being better than them, even at the amazing game that they really won in antiquity. So I hope we do more of that. There's a classical education movement going on, and a lot of hope for the future. Looks like yeah. So, this is one of the reasons that I started my podcast. I wanted people to get inspiration from the great leaders of the past.
Looks like a tech issue, and the Colonel has muted his mic.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the most popular ancient book besides the Bible in the 18th century is a biography collection by a guy named Plutarch, and the founders of this country were deep in not just the kind of political structures and the kind of theoretical and the wars, but in the characters of the great leaders who really stood out. Men like Caesar, Cicero, Cato, Pericles of Greece, Alexander the Great, and they obsessed over these examples of greatness that I can really inspire us today in facing challenges that, it seems like bigger challenges than we faced in my lifetime, at least.
Absolutely. And that's why I want folks to go follow you on X at the Cost of Glory podcast. Alex, thank you so much. Sorry about the tech difficulties. We're working new software all week because Skype went away, and it's causing some interesting things. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex. I hope to have you on sometime in the future to talk more about this, because we can, just Plutarch himself, we could talk for hours on, and that would be a great show. Well, tomorrow is Whistleblower Wednesday, and Mark Mitchell of Rasputin Reports goes by Honest Pollster on X. He is honest, and he's here to tell us how the corporate pollsters are not being honest about Donald Trump's things like right track, wrong track here in the United States. Donald Trump's popularity and the popularity of his policies, most importantly. I'll see you then on the Rob Maness Show.
And good evening. Welcome to the broadcast, the Worldview Tube Washington Report. We're back in our main studios. As you can see, after our 8 days on the road, and that included the nation's capital, I had the chance to meet in person for the first time my co-host, Jim Paff. He joins us from our nation's capital. By the way, we got back at 6:30 a.m. Saturday morning. We left there about 5:30 DC time and drove through the night with our two drivers. And so thanks for all your prayers and support. And we're planning another trip to go back and do some more reporting and filming of more information that we can grab to make into historical documentaries, as we're going to start a Worldview History channel. We have so much to produce that we grab from this trip. You guys only saw about maybe, what you think, Logan, 10% of what we actually filmed? He says, oh yeah. A lot of that's going to be made into documentaries, short form and long format documentaries coming very quickly, folks. You're going to love it. All brought to you free by those of you that support us. And you know how and you know all the ways to do that. Worldviewfoundation.com, worldviewfoundation.com, worldviewtube.com/sponsors, worldviewtube.com/sponsors. The more you support us, the more we crank out. We're only limited by support. That's right. So thank you. Thank you to all of you that prayed for us for safety and great weather and opportunities. We accomplished far more than we ever thought we would. Joining me now is Jim Paff. The conservativecaucus.org is his website. Jim, welcome back. Thanks for being with us. Hope you had a great weekend. I hope you had a great Mother's Day for your wife.
Very much so. It was a great weekend, and we enjoyed ourselves. Thanks,
Good.
And hope for your family too.
We did. Thank you so much. Let's see here. Let's go to a couple stories. Here's one just coming in right now. Federal judge allows IRS to share illegal alien data with the Department of Homeland Security in court win for Trump. There you go. There you go. Your comments?
Yeah, this is incredibly useful and necessary. I mean, how else are you going to be able to figure out where the actual fraud is? There's a bunch of fraud in many government services related to illegal aliens being in this country. Remember, there is no bill, law, anything that's been passed out of Congress that allows any welfare, federal welfare, any federal benefits of any sort to be paid out to illegal aliens. And we need to figure out what's been happening there. But on the other side of that, and this is another reason this is important, are they paying taxes? And if, because they are utilizing some services, even if it's not on welfare. And so we need to be able to monitor what's happening there. And then finally, we need to be able to track where these people are. Where do they live? Validate that. This could be hugely beneficial in trying to figure out, if it's possible to get the data to it, to figure out if there's voter fraud taking place and these people actually voting and they're not citizens of this country. So a whole lot here that's important. Frankly, it seems like a lay down, no-brainer, legally and otherwise. So let's get moving. And congratulations to the Trump team for winning this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to this one here. This is President Trump. We're going to deal with this tomorrow, I think. Well, let's get a jump on it. Something we covered in one of our documentaries. All the white Christian farmers murdered in South Africa. Wait a minute. I'm sure you guys have heard about all the rallies, all the protests around the nation concerned about the genocide of white Christian farmers in South Africa. Haven't you? Oh, wait a minute, you haven't. All you hear about is Gaza, 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 Gaza. Why don't you hear about it?
The reason is
because they're white and Christians. That's why.
That's exactly why. And what is so absurd about the entire DEI movement, really the entire post-George Floyd America, where the protests came up for political purposes to destroy Donald Trump, that even going further back to the fine people on both sides lie, that during 2017,
Charlottesville, Virginia,
when they claimed that Donald Trump was saying good words about Nazis, when actually what he said was, outside of the radical leftists and the Nazi sympathizers or whoever in the crowd, everybody else there were just people trying to express their opinion. So
which was, by the way, not tearing down all of our historical statues, right?
Right. Well, and he, by the way, in that statement, he also gave some credence to the First Amendment rights of those who did want to tear down the statue, but weren't there to cause trouble. So what's really amazing about all this, and this began with Barack Obama. Let's just be very clear here. The post-Ferguson world that we live in is a Barack Obama world that stirred up racial strife that, for those of us who were adults at the time, remember, was not a major problem in the United States prior to the Obama administration. We really had gotten to Martin Luther King's dream of judging people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Barack Obama turned that on its head, the community organizer that he is, and we've been living with worse and worse results ever since. It is absurd also that these people on the left are not protesting what's going on in South Africa because the government there run by a majority black government is killing white people, literally killing them. It's not just that, hey, we're fearful for our lives, we need to figure out what we need to do. They are literally killing these farmers over there. If anyone deserves exile and an opportunity to get away from that threat, these people do. So we should be applauding this. Yeah, I thought it was about freedom and democracy. Well, for Democrats, it's not. It's about political wins and, frankly, control of our lives.
100%. 100%. Let's go to what President Trump had to say. I'm just texting Logan to ask him to bring up a clip I want to play on Brennan House Live later tonight about this, because I had this in my documentary. I think it's in Siege, Logan. Maybe Sabotage, but I think it's in Siege about South Africa. And, by the way, they will... that's a really big cup of coffee there, buddy.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Be still and know I am the Lord.
That's a big cup of coffee.
Yeah, thank you.
Nothing wrong with that, by the way.
No, love coffee.
Yeah, me too. By the way, they torture those white farmers, keep them alive for days so they can torture them. And they never tell you that it's the black communists doing it, right?
That's right.
And oh, wait a minute, you mean it's not the whites that are torturing and killing and murdering the blacks? Oh, no. No, it doesn't fit the narrative either, so we have to ignore that. But then after they skin them, burn them, rape them, torture them, use power drills on them, film it, take pictures, hang them upside down, then they sometimes will put a Bible on their body denoting they've just killed a Christian. Are you aware of one protest in America on this, ever? One? No.
None. And in fact, as bad as the apartheid government was for many, many years, this current government there is much worse. Mm-hmm. This apparently is what they accept as an outcome of stopping what was a bad system. But murder and torture are the ultimate end of the authoritarian instinct. That doesn't mean everybody on the left in this country wants to go there right now, but we do see people committing violence, acting out in ways that are unacceptable. I mean, everything that happens on the left makes January 6th look like a walk in the park. And there were a few bad things there for sure, but my goodness, we are so far beyond any problem that caused, which has not ensued since from the right, so-called right. There is only one methodology to bring about a government and social system that Democrats do support, that is control of media, control of lifestyle. The only way that you can make that happen is with violence. If you have a free society where people can have the ability to disagree and to live their own lives as they see best fit, that society is not one that has broad violence like we are seeing from the left today. Mm-hmm. Consistent, perpetual, broad violence. You go back to the Joe Biden speech, the creepy speech at Independence Hall in Philadelphia with the red background, and he's saying 74 million people are a threat to democracy, so he said. Well, no, not so. We've got hundreds of thousands